A woman's scream pierces the darkness. Deborah jolts upright, heart hammering against her ribs. Her hand instinctively reaches out, but there's no one there. Just the rough bark of the palm tree against her back and the cold night air of the hill country. She presses her palm to her chest, forcing her breathing to slow. Was it a vision? A memory? Or something worse, a prophecy? Around her, the village of Ephraim sleeps behind locked doors and barred windows. 20 years of Canaanite oppression has taught them to hide after dark. But Deborah sleeps here, in the open, beneath the branches that have become her throne and her burden. How much longer? She whispers to the star-scattered sky. Silence. Always silence when she asks that question. Dawn breaks slowly, painting the hills in shades of amber and gold. It should be beautiful. Instead, Deborah watches smoke rise from a neighboring village, another Canaanite raid, another family destroyed. The sound of hoofbeats carries on the morning wind, and she sees them, mothers grabbing children, farmers abandoning their plows, everyone scattering like sheep before wolves. The soldiers don't even dismount. They take what they want, grain, livestock, dignity, and ride on, laughing. This is Israel. God's chosen people, living like prey. By mid-morning, they come to her. They always do. An old man argues with his neighbor over a stolen goat. A widow demands justice for an unpaid debt. Two brothers nearly come to blows over their father's inheritance. Deborah sits beneath her palm tree, already known throughout Ephraim as Deborah's palm, and listens. She judges. She settles their disputes with wisdom that surprises even her sometimes. But there's a heaviness in her eyes that none of them see. She can solve their problems with goats and property lines. She cannot solve the problem of fear that hangs over them all like a storm cloud that never breaks. "Thank you, prophetess," the widow says, bowing. "You always know what God would say." Deborah nods, but the words feel hollow. Does she? Because God has been silent about the one thing that truly matters. When the last petitioner leaves, Deborah walks the dusty path home. Her body aches, not from physical labor, but from carrying the weight of a nation's pain without being able to do anything about it. Lapidoth is waiting at their small home, tending the lamps that provide their livelihood. His hands move with practiced precision, trimming wicks, pouring oil. When he sees her face, he sets down his tools. "You carry too much," he says gently, guiding her to sit. "That's what happens when you listen," she replies, managing a tired smile. He brings her water, bread, the simple comfort of presence. They've been married long enough that words aren't always necessary. But tonight, Lapidoth breaks the silence. The elders are saying Sisera's forces took 3 villages this week. They're saying King Jabin grows bolder. They're saying... I know what they're saying, Deborah interrupts, but not harshly. They're saying the same thing they've said for 20 years. Where is God? Why doesn't he deliver us? And what do you say? Before she can answer, it hits her. The world tilts. Deborah's eyes go wide, unseeing, as images flood her mind with the force of a breaking dam. Iron chariots, hundreds of them, thundering across a valley. A river swollen and red. A tent. A woman's face she doesn't recognize, holding something in her hand, a tent peg? And then a man, a commander with cold eyes and blood on his sword. His face burns itself into her memory. Sisera. She gasps back into her body, and Lapidoth is holding her shoulders, steady and strong. What did you see? His voice is urgent but calm. He's witnessed her visions before. War, she whispers, her voice shaking. I saw war, Lapidoth. Battle. Blood. And I don't know, her voice breaks. I don't know if we win. That night, after Lapidoth finally falls asleep, Deborah climbs the hillside alone. She needs to confront this. To confront him. You speak through me, she says to the darkness, her voice raw with frustration. You use my mouth to judge their disputes over goats and grain and property lines. But you're silent about the oppression that's crushing us. You're silent while Sisera's chariots destroy village after village. You're silent while mothers hide their children and men lose their dignity. Why? The wind stirs through the grass. And then, not audible, not external, but unmistakable, a voice that resonates in her bones. Because you haven't asked the right question. Deborah's breath catches. What question? What question should I be asking? The wind picks up. The stars seem to pulse overhead. And in the distance, carried on the night air, she hears it again, the same woman's scream from her dream, echoing across the valley like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. The scream wasn't a dream. Deborah finds her at dawn, a young woman collapsed beside a burned homestead, rocking back and forth, keening a grief too deep for words. Her name is Tirzah, and until yesterday, she had a husband. They wanted to know where we hid the grain, Tirzah whispers, her voice hollow. He wouldn't tell them. So Sisera's men, she can't finish. Doesn't need to. Deborah kneels beside her in the ashen dirt, wrapping her arms around this stranger who feels like every woman in Israel. She wants to say something comforting, something wise, something prophetic. But what comes out is simpler and more honest. I'm so sorry. Because she is. Sorry that she can judge property disputes but can't give this woman justice. Sorry that she hears God's voice about trivial matters but not about liberation. Sorry that 20 years of her wisdom hasn't freed a single person from Canaanite chains. The frustration builds in her chest like a scream of her own. She helps Tirzah to her feet, arranges for neighbors to take her in, and returns to her palm tree. But she can't settle. Can't focus. When the first petitioner arrives, two farmers arguing over a boundary stone, Deborah barely hears them. And then it happens. Mid-sentence, her mouth stops forming her own words. The farmers stare as Deborah's expression shifts, as if she's listening to something they can't hear. When she speaks again, the voice is hers, but the words are not. Send for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali. The farmers exchange glances. The warrior, one asks carefully. Deborah nods slowly, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking. Yes. Tell him, the Lord commands him to gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. Tell him to go to Mount Tabor. For what purpose, prophetess? The words come with crystalline clarity, to face Sisera and his chariots. God will deliver them into our hands. The farmers leave at a run, boundary dispute forgotten, carrying news that will spread like wildfire through the tribal territories. Deborah sits back against her palm tree, trembling. After 20 years of silence on the one question that mattered, God has finally answered. And his answer is war. Barak arrives 3 days later, and he's not what Deborah expected. She'd imagined a warrior blazing with confidence, eager for battle. Instead, the man who stands before her is weathered and weary, his eyes carrying the weight of too many defeats. He's perhaps 40, with gray threading through his beard and scars mapping his arms. You're the prophetess who's summoning armies now, he asks. There's respect in his tone, but also skepticism. Forgive me if I'm cautious. I've watched us try to fight Sisera before. I've buried men who believed God would deliver us. Sit, Deborah says, and something in her voice makes this warrior obey. She lays out the plan exactly as God gave it to her, 10,000 men gathered at Mount Tabor. Sisera will pursue them to the Kishon River. There, God will deliver the Canaanite commander and all his chariots into their hands. The Kishon Valley, Barak repeats slowly. Where his chariots have the advantage. Where the ground is flat and perfect for cavalry. You want us to fight him there? I want us to trust there, Deborah corrects. God has been silent for 20 years, Barak. Now he's speaking. Are you going to listen? Barak studies her for a long moment. Then he says something that surprises her. I'll go. But only if you go with me. What? If you go with me, I'll go. If you don't, I won't. Deborah's first reaction is anger. Is this cowardice? But Barak continues before she can speak. You think this is fear, but it's faith. These men are farmers and shepherds who've spent 20 years hiding from iron chariots. They need more than my word to stand and fight. They need a sign from God. He leans forward. You are that sign, Deborah. Without you on that mountain, they'll scatter before the first chariot appears. You don't have to hold a sword. You just have to be there. To be proof that God is with us. The truth of his words settles over her. This isn't about Barak's courage, it's about what the people need to believe the impossible. Then I'll go, she says quietly. But understand this, Barak, the honor of killing Sisera won't fall to you. It will fall to a woman. She means it as a rebuke, a consequence of his condition. But Barak just nods, unfazed. I don't care who gets the glory. I care about ending 20 years of oppression. If God wants to give the honor to a woman, let him. I'll settle for freedom. His answer shames her a little. When did she start caring about credit? That evening, she tells Lapidoth. He listens in silence, his face carefully neutral. Only when she finishes does he speak. I'm afraid for you. I'm afraid too, she admits. But for the first time in 20 years, God isn't asking me to just listen. He's asking me to lead. How can I say no to that? Lapidoth takes her hands. You can't. I know that. I married a woman who hears God's voice. I can't ask you to ignore it now. He manages a smile. Just promise me you'll come back. I promise to try. It's the most honest answer she can give. As Deborah begins preparations to leave, a messenger arrives, dust-covered and breathing hard. Prophetess, he gasps. Sisera has heard rumors. Rumors of Israelites gathering. He's mobilizing his forces, all 900 chariots. He's coming. Deborah's stomach drops. They're not ready. The men aren't even gathered yet. But when she looks up, her face shows no fear. Just a terrible, determined resolve. Mount Tabor rises from the Jezreel valley like a fist raised toward heaven. At its base, they gather. Not an army, not yet. Just men. Farmers with calloused hands wrapped around unfamiliar swords. Shepherds who know how to protect sheep from wolves, now expected to stand against iron war machines. Fathers and sons and brothers, all carrying the same haunted look, the look of people who've survived 20 years by hiding, now being asked to fight. Deborah stands beside Barak, watching them arrive in groups of dozens. They're ragged, under-equipped, afraid. When a young man drops his spear for the third time, his hands shaking too badly to hold it, she feels her own doubt rising. How can these men face Sisera's chariots? 10,000, Barak murmurs beside her. The number God commanded. They're all here. 10,000. It should sound like a lot. Against 900 chariots and professionally trained soldiers, it feels impossibly small. But she doesn't let them see her doubt. She steps forward. The murmuring crowd doesn't immediately quiet. They're too busy whispering, questioning, wondering if this is courage or suicide. So Deborah doesn't shout. Instead, she speaks quietly, just loud enough that they have to lean in, have to stop talking to hear. You've spent 20 years asking where's God? The whispers die. Every eye turns toward her. He's asking you the same question. She lets that sit for a moment. Then continues, her voice growing stronger. Where were you when Sisera's men took your grain? Hiding it in caves. Where were you when they destroyed your fields? Replanting in secret. Where were you when they demanded your livestock? Driving your herds into the hills at night. She pauses. You've been preparing for this moment for 20 years. You just didn't know it. A ripple moves through the crowd, recognition, maybe the beginning of something like hope. Every time you sharpened your sickle, you were training. Every time you carried heavy loads up mountain paths, you were building strength. Every night you prayed for deliverance, her voice rises. This is the answer. Not a miracle that requires nothing from you. A miracle that requires everything. But the chariots, someone calls out. Will rust, Deborah says firmly. Empires will fall. Sisera will die. The only question is whether you'll be slaves when it happens, or free men. Whether your children will remember you as the generation that hid, or the generation that fought back. The silence that follows is different. Charged. Dangerous in a new way. Barak steps forward. We make our stand at the Kishon River. Sisera will come with all his forces, and there, exactly there, God will deliver him to us. That night, Deborah walks through the camp. She can't sleep, and neither can most of the men. Some sharpen weapons. Others pray. A few write letters they hope won't need to be delivered. Around one fire, she finds a group of young soldiers, boys, really, barely old enough to grow beards. One of them looks up when she approaches. Is it true what they say? He asks. That you see visions from God? Yes. Then you know what happens tomorrow. Do we win? Deborah sits down beside them, and they shift to make room, awed but also desperate for reassurance. Are you afraid? She asks instead. The boy, his name is Josh, nods. Terrified. Good. So am I. They look shocked. A prophet, afraid? I've spent my whole life hearing God's voice, Deborah continues. But that doesn't mean I'm not human. That doesn't mean I don't feel fear. She stares into the flames. But I'm more afraid of dying without fighting back. I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life knowing I had a chance to be free and chose slavery instead. She turns to look at Josh directly. I once watched someone I loved suffer under Canaanite cruelty. And I did nothing, because I thought I was powerless. I won't make that mistake again. None of us will. The firelight reflects in his young eyes. Something shifts there, from terror toward determination. Meanwhile, miles away in the Canaanite camp, Sisera receives reports. He sits in his tent, studying maps of the valley by lamplight. His commander stands nearby, looking uneasy. 10,000 Hebrews on Mount Tabor, the commander reports. Led by a woman prophet and Barak of Naphtali. Sisera laughs. It's not a kind sound. A prophetess and a coward leading farmers? This will be over by midday. He traces a finger across the map. We'll crush them in the valley. The chariots will cut through them like wheat. My lord, the commander ventures carefully. The God of the Hebrews has done the impossible before. The plagues in Egypt. The Red Sea. Perhaps their God has abandoned them for 20 years because he's tired of their weakness. Sisera stands. Prepare the chariots. All of them. I want those Hebrews to see what real power looks like before they die. But after his commander leaves, Sisera stares at the map for a long time. He touches the spot marking Mount Tabor, then the Kishon River below it. Something feels wrong. But he's too proud to call it fear. Back at the Israelite camp, Deborah stands at the edge, looking out over the dark valley. She can't see the Canaanite forces yet, but she can feel them, a presence, a weight, a coming storm. Barak finds her there. What if God doesn't show up tomorrow? He asks quietly. Deborah turns to face him, and her answer is raw and real. Then we die free instead of living as slaves. But he will show up, Barak. He always has. Not always when we want. Not always how we expect. But he shows up. As if in answer, the wind shifts. Storm clouds begin gathering on the horizon, thick, dark, moving against the natural wind patterns. Deborah feels it in her bones, the same electric sensation from her visions. Tomorrow, she whispers. It begins tomorrow. Dawn comes with an unnatural fog. Thick and gray, it rolls down Mount Tabor like water, swallowing everything. The Israelite soldiers wake to find they can barely see 10 feet ahead. Panic begins to spread through the ranks. What is this? We can't fight in this. It's a curse, God has abandoned us. Deborah stands at the front of the camp, perfectly still, staring into the fog. Waiting. Listening. And then she hears it. The rumble of 900 iron chariots, approaching through the mist like thunder rolling across the earth. The fog lifts like a curtain being pulled back. And there they are. Sisera's army spreads across the Kishon Valley like a sea of iron and death. 900 chariots gleam in the emerging sunlight, arranged in perfect military formation. Behind them, thousands of soldiers, professional warriors with bronze armor and weapons forged specifically for killing. The Israelites stare down from Mount Tabor at their own doom. "We can't fight that," someone whispers. The whisper spreads, becoming a murmur, threatening to become a rout. 10,000 farmers and shepherds, looking at the war machine that's crushed them for 20 years, and suddenly all their courage feels like foolishness. Barak looks at Deborah. His hand is on his sword, but his eyes ask the question his mouth doesn't. "Are you sure?" Deborah closes her eyes. Her lips move in silent prayer, not asking for courage, but for confirmation. For one more sign that she heard correctly. That this isn't mass suicide but divine strategy. The wind shifts. It's subtle at first. A breeze where there shouldn't be one, carrying the smell of rain though the sky was clear moments ago. Deborah's eyes snap open. "Now," she says. "What?" "Now." Her voice rings out across the mountain. "God has gone before you. The Lord will deliver Sisera into your hands." For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then Barak raises his sword. "For Israel. For freedom." And 10,000 farmers charge down Mount Tabor with a roar that shakes the earth. They're halfway down when heaven breaks open. Not gradually, not a building storm, but an explosion of divine fury. Thunder cracks so loud it feels like the sky is tearing apart. Lightning strikes the valley floor in rapid succession, so bright it burns after images into vision. And the rain. It doesn't fall. It attacks. Sheets of water hammer down with violence, turning the Kishon Valley from hard-packed earth to churning mud in minutes. The Kishon River, normally a gentle stream, swells instantly to a raging torrent, overflowing its banks. The iron chariots, Sisera's greatest advantage, his invincible war machines, become death traps. Wheels sink into mud up to the axles. Horses scream and rear, unable to gain purchase on the slick ground. Charioteers try desperately to turn around, to retreat, but the flood is everywhere, rising, pulling, drowning. The Israelites, on foot, suddenly have every advantage. They crash into the Canaanite forces like a hammer on an anvil. These men who've spent 20 years hiding are fighting with the fury of the oppressed finally unleashed. Every blow carries the weight of stolen grain, burned homes, murdered loved ones. Josh, the young soldier from the campfire, finds himself face to face with a Canaanite warrior twice his size. The man raises his sword to strike. Josh freezes, fear turning his limbs to stone. Then he sees her. Deborah, standing on a ridge above the battle, rain pouring down her face. She's not fighting, she doesn't need to. She's there. Present. Living proof that God is with them. Josh remembers her words, "I'm more afraid of dying without fighting back." He raises his own sword and blocks the strike. And then he fights back. All across the valley, it's the same. The supernatural storm has evened the odds, but it's the presence of the prophetess, visible, unwavering, that gives the men courage to press forward when instinct screams to run. Sisera, standing in his disabled chariot, watches his perfect army come apart. This isn't how battles work. This isn't how military campaigns are supposed to go. He's the superior force. He has the training, the equipment, the experience. But he doesn't have God. The realization hits him like a physical blow. 20 years of oppressing these people, and their God, silent for so long, has finally spoken. And his word is judgment. Pride turns to panic. Retreat. Sisera screams. Retreat. But there's nowhere to go. The river blocks one side, the mountain another, and the Israelites are everywhere, fighting with a ferocity born of 2 decades of rage finally given an outlet. Sisera makes a decision that will save his life for exactly one more day. He abandons everything. His chariot. His army. His honor. He jumps down into the mud and runs. Deborah sees him go. The vision from her first night flashes through her mind, the tent, the peg, the woman's face. She turns to Barak, who's fighting nearby, covered in mud and blood. Barak! Sisera flees. Follow him. Barak gathers a group of soldiers and gives chase, leaving the rest to finish the battle that's already won. They pursue Sisera through mud and rain and chaos, following his trail north into the hills. But somewhere in the confusion of the storm, they lose him. Barak searches desperately, frantically. They were so close. Victory was in their grasp. How can they have won the battle but lost the man who matters most? Spread out, he orders. Search every. My lord. One of his soldiers points. In the distance, barely visible through the rain, a cluster of tents. The encampment of Heber the Kenite, whose clan has maintained peace with the Canaanites. Would he go there? The soldier asks. He might think it's safe, Barak mutters. But something feels wrong. He remembers Deborah's prophecy, the honor won't be yours. It will fall to a woman. He'd assumed she meant herself. But what if? They approach the tents cautiously. And there, standing at the entrance to one tent, is a woman Barak doesn't recognize. She's calm despite the storm, composed despite the chaos. When she sees the Israelite soldiers, she doesn't flee or scream. She smiles. Come, she says. I'll show you the man you're looking for. Her name is Jael. 6 hours earlier, she was just another woman in Heber's clan, living the quiet life of the Kenite, metalworkers and tent dwellers who maintained careful neutrality in a dangerous world. They had peace treaties with Canaan. They traded with Israel. They survived by staying out of conflicts. But neutrality, Jael has learned, is just another word for complicity. She'd been grinding grain when she saw him, Sisera, the great commander, stumbling through the rain like a hunted animal. Covered in mud, alone, afraid. The man whose chariots had terrorized the region for 20 years, reduced to this. He saw her tent and made his choice. Woman, he called. I need shelter. Hide me. Your husband has peace with King Jabin, you owe me protection. Jael looked at this man who commanded armies, who took what he wanted, who expected everyone to serve him. And she made her own choice. Come in, my lord, she said, her voice gentle, unthreatening. Don't be afraid. Inside the tent, Sisera collapsed. The adrenaline of battle and flight was leaving him, replaced by exhaustion so deep it felt like dying. I'm thirsty, he demanded. Jael brought him milk, warm, soothing, sleep-inducing. She even covered him with a blanket, playing the role of the helpful woman, the subservient subject. Stand at the entrance, Sisera ordered, his eyelids already drooping. If anyone comes asking, tell them you saw no one. Do you understand? Yes, my lord. Good. He let his eyes close. Safe at last. Protected by treaty and tradition and the assumption that a woman would obey. That was his final mistake. Jael waited until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then she looked around her tent, this space that was hers, that she'd built with her own hands. The fabric she'd woven. The pegs she'd hammered. She picked up one of those tent pegs. The tool of her daily life. And a hammer. Her hands didn't shake. This wasn't cruelty or vengeance or even anger. This was justice wearing the face of an ordinary woman who'd watched too many ordinary women suffer. She thought of every raid she'd seen. Every family destroyed. Every woman like herself who'd lost someone to Sisera's violence. All the time she'd stayed silent, stayed neutral, stayed safe. Not today. One decisive strike. The tent peg went through Sisera's temple and into the ground beneath. He never woke. Never knew. One moment he was a commander sleeping under treaty protection, the next he was dead at the hands of a woman whose name he never bothered to learn. Jael stood over his body, breathing hard, the hammer still in her hand. She felt no triumph. No satisfaction. Just a quiet certainty that this was always how it was meant to end. When she heard voices outside, soldiers searching, she stepped calmly to the tent entrance. The rain had stopped. The battle was over. And Barak, son of Abinoam, stood before her with murder in his eyes and desperation on his face. "I'm looking for Sisera," he said, hand on his sword. Jael met his eyes steadily. "Come. I'll show you the man you're looking for." She pulled back the tent flap. Barak stepped inside and froze. There, pinned to the earth like a butterfly in a collection, was the commander who'd terrorized Israel for 20 years. Dead by a tent peg. Killed by a woman. "When?" Barak asked, his voice hollow. "An hour ago. Maybe less. He came seeking protection. I gave him what he deserved." Barak stared at the body, and slowly, so slowly, the prophecy's full meaning dawned on him. "Deborah said, she said the honor wouldn't be mine. That it would fall to a woman." "Then your prophetess speaks truth," Jael said simply. There was a moment of silence. Then Barak did something unexpected. He laughed. Not mockery, but the kind of laughter that comes when the universe reveals itself to be more just and more ironic than you ever imagined. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jael. Daughter of no one important. Wife of Heber the Kenite." "Jael," Barak repeated. "The woman who killed Sisera. You'll be remembered long after kings are forgotten." The news spread faster than the earlier storm. By the time Barak's soldiers returned to the valley, everyone knew Sisera was dead. Not killed in glorious combat by a warrior champion, but in his sleep, by a woman with a tent peg. The Canaanite forces, already broken, completely dissolved. Without their commander, without their chariots, they scattered and ran. Victory was complete. At the battlefield, Deborah received the news on her knees in the mud, surrounded by celebrating soldiers. When they told her about Jael, about the tent peg, about the fulfillment of her prophecy in a way she never expected, she didn't stand and cheer. She wept. Relief. Grief for the cost. Gratitude for deliverance. Exhaustion from the weight she'd carried. All of it poured out in tears that mixed with the rain-soaked earth. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." But even as the celebration began, a messenger arrived with troubling news. King Gideon is mobilizing reinforcements from the northern cities. He swears vengeance for Sisera. This may not be over. Deborah looked up at the messenger, then at the celebrating soldiers, then back toward Mount Tabor where thousands had just discovered what it meant to be free. Her voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "Then neither are we. The war didn't end at the Kishon River." King Gideon, furious over Sisera's death and the destruction of his chariot forces, gathered what remained of his power for one final stand. But something had changed in Israel. The farmers who'd charged down Mount Tabor weren't farmers anymore, they were an army. An army that had seen God fight for them. It took 3 months of strategic campaigns, but under Deborah and Barak's leadership, they systematically dismantled what remained of Gibeon's military structure. City by city, stronghold by stronghold, until finally the king himself was defeated and his power broken forever. 20 years of oppression ended not with a single miracle, but with sustained courage born from one divine moment. When the last battle is won, when the last Canaanite garrison surrenders, Deborah returns to find Tirzah, the young widow from the beginning, replanting crops on land that's finally, truly hers. The woman who'd been shattered by grief is whole again, not because the pain is gone, but because she has a future. She places a small stone memorial at the edge of her field. No inscription. Just a stone. Personal. Meaningful. "For him?" Deborah asks. "For all of them," Tirzah replies. "Everyone we lost. And everyone we saved." Deborah's palm tree stands waiting for her, unchanged by the battles fought in its shadow. But she's changed. The people who come now don't just seek judgment for their disputes, they seek wisdom from someone who led them through hell and back. One afternoon, a young girl approaches, perhaps 8 years old, clutching a wooden sword. "Is it true you're a warrior?" she asks, eyes wide. Deborah smiles and kneels to the girl's level. I'm a woman who listened when God spoke and moved when he called. That's all. And you know what? You can be that too. But I'm just, the girl starts. Just what? Just a girl? So was I. So was Jael. God doesn't call the qualified, little one. He qualifies the called. The girl beams and runs off, wooden sword held high. That night, sitting with Barak, Deborah does something she's been planning since the victory. They compose a song. Not a military report or a historical record, but a testimony, a way to ensure this story, this miracle, this moment never gets forgotten. They call it the Song of Deborah. It begins with praise, not for themselves, but for God who orchestrated everything. It honors the tribes who came when called and calls out those who stayed home. It celebrates Jael with words that will make her infamous forever. Most blessed of women be Jael, most blessed of tent-dwelling women. As Deborah sings the words for the first time, accompanied by drums and lyres, images flash through her mind like her visions, but these are memories. The battle, lightning splitting the sky. The tent peg, justice in unexpected hands. The freed villages, children playing without fear. Josh, the young soldier, teaching his own son to stand tall. The river, returning to its gentle flow as if the storm never happened. She reaches the final verse, and her voice grows soft but fierce. So may all your enemies perish, Lord. But may all who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. The gathered crowd, warriors, families, survivors, repeats it back to her. It becomes their anthem. Their hope. Their declaration. Later, sitting beneath her palm tree at sunset with Lapidoth beside her, Deborah reflects on everything that's happened. I thought God's call would make me strong, she says quietly. But it didn't. It just revealed I already was, I just needed a reason to believe it. Lapidoth takes her hand. And now? Now I understand something I never did before. Everyone is waiting for someone else to be brave first. Someone else to stand up. Someone else to lead. But sometimes, she looks at the horizon, where the sun is setting in brilliant gold. Sometimes you have to be that someone. The text that follows Deborah's story is simple. Then the land had peace for 40 years. 40 years. An entire generation grew up free because one woman listened to God's voice and one army of ordinary people chose courage over fear. The final image is of Deborah's palm tree years later, now surrounded by saplings, new growth, new life, new hope. Children play beneath its branches, including the young girl with the wooden sword, now teaching her own daughter that women can be prophets and warriors and leaders. The camera pulls back slowly, showing a thriving Israel, free and strong, before fading to Deborah's voice, older now but still powerful. You might think you're too ordinary for God to use. Too broken. Too afraid. So did I. I was just a woman sitting under a tree, judging disputes about goats and grain. I had no army. No training. No credentials. Just a voice I couldn't ignore and a choice I had to make. But God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. He didn't need me to be a warrior. He needed me to be willing. To take one step forward when everything in me screamed to step back. To believe that the same God who parted the Red Sea and stopped the sun could work through someone like me. And here's what I learned. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to be brave, the moment you stop asking why me, and start asking why not me, that's when everything changes. So I have a question for you, watching this right now. What's your Mount Tabor? What's the battle you're being called to that terrifies you? What's the voice you keep ignoring because you don't feel qualified enough, strong enough, important enough? Because I promise you this, the same God who gave a prophetess an army, who turned a river into a weapon, who used a tent peg to end a tyrant's reign, He's standing with you too. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't even need to be sure you'll succeed. You just have to take the first step. And then the next one. And watch what God does with your willingness. The world doesn't need more qualified people. It needs more willing people. People who will sit under their own palm tree, Whatever that looks like for you, and when God speaks, when that voice calls you to something bigger and scarier than you've ever imagined, you don't say, "Why me?" You say, "Here I am. Send me." So what's your palm tree? What's the place where God is calling you to lead, to speak, to stand? Drop a comment if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're braver than they think. And remember, you don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to be willing.